Good morning. I'm Mike Driscoll. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rill Data. And today, for our Data-Driven Leaders series, I'm excited to have Kat Tomlin, Disco's Director of Business Operations, joining us. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Uh, we were talking before we started the session a little bit about your journey in analytics. You started out in customer success. Now you're the director of business operations at Disco. Before we talk about your specific role at Disco, I'd love just to hear, in your own words, for those who are not familiar with, what does Disco do? We know that you are transforming checkouts into AI-powered growth is what Disco says on
Yeah.
its website. But maybe for the audience and those who are listening, tell us a little bit about how Disco helps customers and kind of the animating vision for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. To take it outside of our website terminology, Disco is building a post-checkout advertising network. And so essentially what that means is we are reaching consumers at high intent moments of shopping, which is right after they've checked out. They're excited, you get that high, you know your order's on its way. And we want to prompt with really relevant recommendations about what they may need next or in addition to what they just bought. And so ultimately, our customers are both those consumers, the end consumers interacting with our advertisements, but more directly, the advertisers themselves. So the brands that we're working with to display these ads. And then also the inventory, those post-checkout moments on D2C e-commerce brands and looking to expand beyond that across the web. So we've definitely got a lot of different players here, but really honing in on that customer experience is key for us.
What are some of the brands that Disco is most proud of serving that you can share with folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I started at customer success when I came on to Disco, so I had the privilege of working with so many of our great brands and the ones you see every day. And some that come to mind that we really love working with would be the Caraways of the world, Dagny Dover. If you think about going into New York City and Soho, you're seeing all of those Disco brands in their storefronts. And so been really exciting to be on the forefront of some very popular rising e-com D2C brands across the space, and plenty more in addition to those too.
Let's talk about some analytics. Of course, a business like Disco, you guys are an always on platform. Retail, internet retail, e-commerce never sleeps. Let's talk a little bit about, your journey into analytics. Again, starting out in customer success, now, leading business operations as director of business operations at Disco. Maybe kind of a day in the life of Kat Tomlin. How do you use data day to day? How does it inform decisions? What does it look like? When you wake up in the morning, what are some of those analytics tools that you're leveraging to succeed and thrive at Disco?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely had a unique journey as it comes to analytics and data throughout my career. Having started in customer success, the interest kind of generated from curiosity and just not being satisfied with the top level answer or just the top level number and needing to know more to better help my customers. And so just kind of like the relentless curiosity is what drove me to where I am today, leading business operations and inclusive business intelligence at Disco, and have really found a passion for that. And so in my day to day, you said it best, Mike, ecom never sleeps. First thing in the morning are opening up dashboards, right? Seeing how we performed throughout the night. People are shopping at the middle of the night too, or on the subway home, or whatever it may be. And so a lot of my day starts with looking at those benchmark dashboards, our main KPIs. Is there anything that has been alerted to me or flagged that I really need to hone in and jump into? And making sure there's consistency there. And that's really how it kind of sets up my day because my day can look very different if we've got an alert, a fire drill, something is going awry. And so that kind of can then dictate my morning or even potentially the rest of my day. Or if we're all status quo, then it allows me to kind of have confidence in really jumping into those additional projects that take the rest of my day. And so that's really where Rill has been super helpful in just truly starting my day in the Rill tab.
What and when it comes to kind of I think a lot of us talk about of course, the benefits of being data driven and tracking core metrics, in an organization. Maybe let's talk about metrics. One of the things, of course, that we feel strongly about at Rill, and we hope that philosophy is shared by Disco, is really making metrics the core of an analytics strategy. Not necessarily making dashboards, but saying, okay, let's see if we can all agree on a set of key metrics, key operational metrics that we track. Um, Hopefully, not hundreds, a handful. And maybe just talk about at Disco, and to the extent you can share, what are some of those kind of operational metrics, kind of leading indicators that you look at sort of to assess, the health of the platform, and first maybe the identity of those metrics, and then maybe talk about the process of like how do organizations agree on the definition of those metrics? I think that that seems like a, sort of like how is that sausage made in a sense of how you decide what those metrics are that should matter so you're not tracking so many, but also how do you agree on the definition of a key metric that's taking account, a lot of different pieces of the puzzle.
Yes, we've had a lot of conversations about just this. And I think being in advertising, there's plenty of metrics. There's no shortage of metrics that we can be looking at. And just the standard ones, impressions to speak to our scale, CTR, how our customers and consumers interacting with the Disco placements. But where Disco has really kind of grown to address this and what we're deciding to be our KPIs is what do we care about? What is the story we're trying to tell or the question we're trying to answer, whether it be a daily cadence, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly? What is ultimately the thing that matters most? And we'll answer that question or tell that story for us, which has led us to kind of the conversation of our KPIs. And one that immediately comes to mind is we're big on acronyms here, but RPC. And so what that stands for Disco is revenue per checkout. How well are we, taking this moment and monetizing it for our advertisers and for that placement for our publishers and really honing in on the effectiveness of that interaction? How can we improve that? And so to your point, Mike, it's definitely all about getting key stakeholders across the business align to this metric, a very core understanding of not only what it is and how we define it and how we measure it, but why it matters. Why does
Mhm.
this matter to the leader of customer success? Why does this matter to the head of sales, to the head of engineering? And why does it matter for all of Disco ultimately of a core KPI to kind of hone in on? When you have that investment and understanding from all different stakeholders and leaders and individual contributors across the company, you're rooted and grounded in that understanding. And so you kind of have agents all over the company looking at this metric and able to call out things that may be surprising when you look at that. So that's very, very topical of one that we're looking at constantly. And then, speaking to impressions and just scale. We're always looking
Mhm.
to grow the number of eyeballs and add more to the network that is Disco and get more opportunities to convert and just being able to chart that and look at that over time and really hone in on how we can kind of continue to optimize for scale is another really major KPI for the business.
What are some of the challenges around metrics like RPC and impressions? And maybe I'll throw one out there, and I'd love to hear if there's some others out there that you've dealt with. One of the things we hear about from our customers and users a lot is discrepancies in metrics. And we see there's discrepancies not just between a platform that we work with like Disco and maybe their partners who might be tracking things on both sides of a fence, but we often even see discrepancies inside organizations. They've got multiple systems and multiple ways to count things, and so I guess maybe there's a question there about how has Disco worked to um, resolve discrepancies or think about, what is truth, which is always,
Yes.
I think a hard question to answer. but then are there other, what are some other challenges that, you've dealt with when kind of working with, being a metrics driven organization?
Yep. I think it's first starting with addressing assumptions. If we use RPC as the example here, revenue, pretty straightforward. Everyone should have a good understanding of, where our revenue is coming from, how does Disco make money, right? But the per checkout piece, the checkout piece is actually a very interesting take because what is a checkout for Disco? How are we
Mhm.
defining that? How are we building that metric even in our infrastructure? And actually addressing assumptions across different stakeholders at the business. What we found was some stakeholders had an understanding of checkouts being a load of our ad, and that really kind of correlates to more so an impression, or isn't a checkout an opportunity for our ad to be shown, even if it's not? And so understanding, how different people are interpreting this metric that we're trying to define, and then having that discussion. Oh, that's an interesting take that you have, and kind of meshing those things and really getting down to the core of what is truth, which is
Mhm.
I feel like a question that will never ultimately be answered, but we're constantly striving for. And so having that understanding of how we've come to define this metric very specifically, I think is key. And then to your point about discrepancies, we deal with those all the time. And, I think sometimes people that are in the data all day, it can be a big red flag, but I like to think of it actually as a really good learning opportunity. Why could there have been this discrepancy? What are we potentially missing,
Mhm.
missing out on, or missing an understanding? Something we come up with a lot is with our customers.
Mhm.
We're grading our own homework in a lot of ways. Our customers are grading us as well. Any discrepancies that we can understand from the data they're looking at in their platforms, whether it's Google Analytics or a third party kind of attribution source, how can we understand things that we can improve upon to ideally reduce those discrepancies, but also to optimize? There's so much opportunity, I think, in a discrepancy that can be really positive and a good takeaway and a learning both internally or when working with customers.
The one of the conversations we had over the last year was for many e-com platforms the biggest few days or week of the year. I guess it used to be Cyber Monday was the
Yeah.
day that everyone logged on. I guess went to work and logged on and did their
Yeah,
shopping.
exactly.
Back when internet access somehow wasn't available at home. Uh,
Yep.
Now, of course, Black Friday is just as big of a day for ecom, if not bigger.
Yep.
Um, Tell us a little bit about, those few days of you know intense activity that happen at a place like Disco, and maybe again about how analytics plays a role. Just kind of paint a picture for folks. Like I have in my mind almost like this idea of like a command center, right, where Kat Tomlin and her team, the business operations team is like manning the consoles, but
Yeah.
maybe just help us understand, like, that I think that sort of is a very vivid example of where kind of real-time metrics and real-time analytics can be such an important part because so much activity is happening on your platform during that period. Maybe tell us a little bit about that experience, and then, maybe this can segue into kind of where Rill fits into, Disco's analytics stack. But maybe give you a chance to talk
Yeah.
about that very crazy week of your life
It
every.
is. It is. And it seems to be growing. And I think you touched on it really well there, Mike, of historically it was, people lining up at midnight at the Target and Walmart to get their TVs, right? And then Cyber Monday comes in. And actually now what we're even seeing is the entire month of November is shopping month, whether it's preparation for those days, but brands are starting to introduce deals even earlier.
Mhm.
So it's what we call our Super Bowl because it really is. You're spot on with the command center. It is all hands on deck. And we've got people manning the ship, if you will, at all hours during those key days, especially. And when it comes to analytics, it's everything. It's where we start with preparation. Even now, I'm starting to talk about Black Friday and Cyber Monday
Wow.
preparation for those days, which is wild to think about, but of course it'll come up quickly. But really where it starts is understanding trends. What can we anticipate going into Q4, the month of November, these specific days? And that all goes back to years prior. We are seeing
Hmm.
shopping habits change year over year, of course, but we can get a sense of what we can anticipate from the data that we've collected for the past 4 years, that Disco's been around. And so we know when those trends start to go up, and that's really where we start. And working alongside our teams, engineering, you're going to see a major influx at these hours, at these times. We need to have all of our systems ready for that influx of traffic, right? We can't have anything going down. And so to be able to empower the technical teams and their preparation for those days in our infrastructure is huge. And then when it comes to the day, it really is, just a refresh of the data. And all of that goes back to understanding in the preparation of what do we expect to see? What are those benchmarks? How are we pacing towards those benchmarks? Is anything looking different, positively or negatively? Is there anything that we need to, jump in on? Any red alerts, having alerting set up so that you're not having to really waste time coming to a conclusion of, is something off here? Have that set up before so it just can tell you, and that
Hmm.
you're then able to just immediately kind of jump in with your team and address a potential problem. And so it's at the core of everything we do. And then if you think about the week has passed, Cyber Monday's behind us, the work doesn't stop there. And as my team knows, it's then all about the retroactive understanding of, did we hit our metrics?
Hmm.
What went great, what went wrong, where did we ultimately net out here, and aggregating all of that understanding for Disco as a business, but then of course for our customers, and
Hmm.
giving them that understanding of, great, you guys crushed your Black Friday and Cyber Monday with Disco, and we can show you here and how that growth has looked not only for this year but years prior as well.
What are some surprising, maybe, without talking about any individual, brand that's on the Disco platform,
Yep.
maybe, what are some surprising, you talk about benchmarks and expectations for, every kind of Cyber Monday, Black Friday, kind of November shopping
Yes.
season. What are some of surprising insights that you saw or you have seen over the last 4 years that, unexpected, that maybe shifted
Yeah.
what those benchmarks, might be for next year? And again, maybe talking in a way that doesn't reveal any one customer's
Yeah.
or any one of your brand's experiences. What's changing in the world of e-com that stands out and is kind of evident in those metrics that you track?
Yeah, so many really interesting things, I think, especially from last year that we gathered. But with these customers being e-com brands and thinking about the consumer shopping habits, there's a lot of preparation that a consumer will have going into these peak times. They know they can expect a deal. They want to get the best deal. Are they going
Hmm.
to get the best deal by being a part of the loyalty club and kind of trying to chart out and anticipate when will they make the buy? And something
Hmm.
that we found last year that was really interesting was we saw, of course, a ton of scale and influx on Black Friday and a ton of impressions and engagement, click-through rates with our advertisements, but we're also tracking the end result of a conversion, a order being placed. We saw a lot of add to carts at Black Friday, but then consumers were actually waiting potentially till a better deal
Hmm.
on Cyber Monday that then they were converting. So it was really interesting to see the habits throughout the weekend of just kind of getting in the mindset of the consumer. And it can really vary based on our customer too. If you think about, a high priced product, that takes a lot of thought and consideration. You don't buy a mattress every day, let's say, for an
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
And so you want to make sure you're getting the best deal versus potentially a skincare product that you're running through and you're continually going back to, and you're a loyal customer too, but you want to get the best deal at the best time of year. Trying to time the purchases was a very interesting correlation that we saw with our scale as well, and kind of inversely correlated, which was very interesting and not something that we anticipated seeing. So it was a big learning.
Interesting. So just to play that back, an inverse correlation between the size of a purchase and maybe the length of time between when it was added to cart and when it was kind of consummated, I guess.
Yeah, or even just the correlation, inverse correlation to the number of eyeballs we saw in advertisements to the action of ordering. And so you
Mm,
would think those to be pretty synonymous, more eyeballs, more people buying, but not necessarily. And it's really kind of speaking to the intent time of that purchase for the consumer, which is why post-purchase is so interesting of
right,
a moment for Disco to hone in on. But yeah, definitely was something that we were monitoring, but the hypothesis was proven otherwise, which
right,
is always something
great.
I
If that didn't happen, what if everything happened exactly as you expected, you wouldn't need to track any of the stats,
boring. Who
right?
wants that? That's so boring. We don't want everything to be exactly as we expect.
So, not talking about analytics tools. I obviously we're here to talk a bit about how Rill fits into the Disco ecosystem, but maybe more broadly, what are some of the you know I guess some folks out here are often listen to a discussion like this to help understand how data fits into their role, their organization. If if you were giving advice to a colleague that just started as the director of business operations at a non-competitive uh,
Yeah,
player in e-commerce, what are some of the tools that you would recommend, are kind of bread and butter? And obviously, we hope Rill is one of them, but maybe just like what's in your toolkit today as as you do your job, and what you would recommend that others kind of essentially need to get their, perform their role as a data-driven operations leader.
absolutely. I mean, Real definitely primarily comes to mind. I think what has been so impactful about utilizing Real and in this role is evangelizing our data across the company. I think an Achilles heel that I see sometimes in organizations is you have a data team or you have a data person, an individual, and the understanding the data isn't evangelized and people don't feel that agency, whether you're an SDR or you're a software engineer, to feel like they have this data and these understandings at their fingertips. So Real has changed the game for us in that regard. We were using tools previously that were too overwhelming for our disco people, and that ultimately led to a lot of misunderstandings about our data and not feeling confident in going in and finding answers. And so ultimately, I think that is what you should prioritize when using data-driven tools is making sure that it's usable for your stakeholders.
Mhm.
And you're
Mhm.
evaluating tools, is this something that you as a data-driven person are inclined to understand, but can you put yourselves in the shoes of a non-technical user? Will they be able to go in and not only understand the tool, but ideally use the tool? We want to create power users across the organization. Real has absolutely been a game changer for us in that regard. And in addition to that, as much as you can integrate and pipe into other tools, whether it's your CRM, of course, data is never in a silo ever.
Mhm.
It correlates to everything. And so, as I've been talking about our customer performance, we're using Real to display customer data that needs to be integrated to our CRM. Our sales
Mhm.
team needs to understand metrics for their prospecting, their pipeline, everything that, revolves around RevOps as well. So the integrations are also key, not to
Mhm.
mention data warehouse, Snowflake, so many different tools to be able to integrate.
What um what are some of the you talk about evangelizing data in the organization. Sometimes the term of art that's used a lot is data democratization is a word that
Yeah.
a lot of folks throw around. And then another buzzword is self-serve analytics.
Yep.
Um, but when where I guess again to that element of surprise, like what has surprised you? You said that you've worked with other tools that maybe were too overwhelming, and maybe that ended up creating some friction to their adoption. Um, who are some of the groups of users inside of Disco that surprised you that have actually kind of leaned into being a little bit more data driven? I often think that like you know, I think as humans, we really are all, kind of naturally data literate, right? We all kind of think about the
Yeah.
world. We all have, a module in our brains for, adding numbers and so it shouldn't be surprising that, anyone in an organization should be able to work with data. This is not something that's just the high priests on some data team, are able to
Yeah.
use. But in your experience, yeah, what groups of folks at Disco have surprised you in terms of their adoption of something like Rill?
Yeah. I can do this because I was previously in customer success, but I'll aggregate it to our go-to-market team.
Hmm.
I completely agree. We're all have a level of data literacy, but I think what I say, are you data hungry? Are you really curious, or are you looking to just find a graph? And so I think you use that buzzword self-serve. And I really like to differentiate when I'm, you know, presenting the tool, training anybody up on the tool, or helping them with an analysis of understanding this is self-serve in the sense that I am empowering you to go and utilize this tool to answer your questions or potentially even come up with more questions and keep diving
Hmm.
and keep wondering. But in no way do I want this to be a tool that you go, and you have a graph delivered to you, you see four numbers and you take away an understanding. I want it to be so much more than that. And I'm really big on the storytelling of data. And
Hmm.
so, yes, my go-to-market folks have been so awesome in their adoption of Rill and going in, and it makes my day when I get a link or a screenshot from a pivot table that they've built in Rill. And hey, I think I came to this conclusion, Kat. Can you confirm that I'm understanding this correctly? Have I used the right metrics? Am I comparing this to the right date range? Just asking those questions to validate what they've already gone in and built rather than say, okay, I saw the graph and I took away my understanding and now I go on my merry way. But it
Hmm.
just fosters and almost forces the function of curiosity, which I think is ultimately going to lead to a richer understanding of the data and the story, and the answer that everyone's coming to with the tool.
What someone recently told me that I chatted with is they said, you know, I had heard about Rail and some folks that I'd worked with had told me, check out this BI tool Rail. And they their initial response was another BI tool. They were like,
Yep.
oh man, I just don't have the energy to try another BI
Yeah.
tool. And and I think that's probably a lot of folks, maybe even within Disco, where you say,
Yeah.
hey, I want to tell you about this, this BI tool this other BI tool that we've now incorporated. How have you, I guess two questions,
Yeah.
what's different? What has been different or differentiated about Rail that you've been able to maybe overcome that resistance to, like, oh no, Kat is trying to convince me to try like yet another BI tool to stop pestering her for answers.
Yes. What I found to be the most effective, because I understand that it's another tool, it's another change, whether, speaking to when we got transitioned over to Rill. And the way I approached it was to prove it, see it for yourself. And so my team will probably laugh, but I gave homework. Hey, we're going to be having this training on a new tool called Rill. And you're going to have three questions that I'm presenting you with. Each of you will share your screen, and they're gonna laugh because I put people on the spot sometimes like that. But it was so fun to see their eyes light up with how intuitive it was to use, and very tactical questions that I actually altered by team or by individual that was relevant to them, and kind
Hmm.
of presenting of, hey, how many times have you asked me to see the impressions for your set of customers, let's say? Um, Kind of explain to me from this very high level introduction that I've given you to this tool, how would you go about that? And just seeing them be able to navigate.
Hmm.
Whereas before it was almost terror to go into previous tools. I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. It's not delivered to me on a dashboard. And really seeing that kind of light bulb moment go off for everybody at the company, and then feeling empowered to, oh, I can do this. Like,
Hmm.
I've got more questions actually than the homework I was assigned by Kat, and kind of taking it and immediately running with it. We saw such great immediate adoption across the company, which was very helpful as the one trying to, get that instated.
Well, kudos for you. Maybe we'll take a page out of your book and try that. Maybe try to emulate that the real
Yeah,
educational seminar approach.
yes.
Um,
Rewards are always good. You can add in a reward there. That might help too.
in another life, you could have been, a middle school, algebra teacher. Well, on that note, and I thought one of the things we chatted about was obviously we don't want you to show any of Disco's
Yeah.
internal dashboards, but there was a demo dashboard that is free and publicly available. It does have some advertising like data in it. I just
Yeah.
thought if you were willing to pull that up and maybe just share, again, maybe in that vein of like, an exhausted member of your team is saying like, "Oh, Kat, what is this thing?" Maybe
Yep.
in your own words, you could just you know, give us a little bit of a tour and of how you think about this tool rail. Kind of, what are some of the features that you appreciate? And this is gonna be kind of the elevator tour. You're caught in the elevator with a colleague, and they're like, "Oh no, Kat, you've cornered me. What is this thing rail, and why should I care?"
Well, it's funny. There's plenty of times that I have it up on my phone in an elevator with our CEO and we're looking at data. So very relevant. But I think, when I think about Rill and initially coming into the tool and, even seeing other people at the company utilize it, what immediately comes to mind is what, this explore view that we have in front of us here. There's plenty of times where you're not trying to understand, maybe a trend or see data over time. You just need a number.
Hmm.
You have that number here. It's immediately accessible to you, but you have more than just a number displayed to you. Let's use advertising spend overall. You can see the trend over time. Great. This initiates an immediate question. What happened between September 13th and September 15th? I want to dig into that. And you can immediately kind of with this usability be able to do that and expand and ultimately understand, oh, that's right, we shipped this improvement. We can see that here. And so it just kind of follows again. It's all about intuitive nature of how you're going to interact with the tool. I have a question I want to learn more. I'm going to click into this. For Disco, of course, when we are looking at our customer base and we want to see an individual or a breakdown of, let's say, our top spenders, we can get that understanding here, advertising spend overall by a customer base here, in this example, domain names. And then you can click in individually. Oh, wow, really interested about Hyundai. I mean, can we just for a minute talk about the speed? Like, have you ever AI tool load like that? That was the number one thing that was I truly didn't believe when I first saw it coming onto Rill, but it just kind of takes away so many clicks, so many steps, so many questions for an individual. Where do I go and filter? All of that's available, but it's right here. And it follows just a very, again, I've said it, but intuitive path of thinking when interacting with the tool. Um, but I will have to say my favorite part is going to be the pivot function. I
Uh,
mean, when I, again, early on in my career, I'm using pivot tables all day, every day, and probably started by not loving them and then have grown to absolutely love them. And so for me, being able to easily slice in data here, if we use that example of by day, the ad spend overall, and we want to see what changes, you can add in the hour as well. Or if I need a breakdown of the advertiser name within that. For this example here, we can see that the advertising names given even by day, you could just so easily craft this pivot table in real time, add to it, change it, and get it in a view that is getting your answer right here, right now. And this is really the part that I go back to of what is the question you're trying to answer? How are you trying to answer that? And it really enables the thought process of, well, what do I want to choose from here? You can see it all available. Oh, is impressions actually a better way to look at this? Or I'm curious, do they correlate? Do they not correlate?
mhm.
Being able to see that in a pivot view. And then, of course, if you need to be sharing, easily accessible to export and access outside of Rill itself, but obviously just right here.
Okay, I'm gonna pause there while we've got you saying some nice things and maybe we'll end. I know we've got a few minutes left.
Yes.
Maybe I'll stop. I won't let you have to share your screen longer, but I'll say any other features in particular, you talked about pivot tables, the speed. We're of course very proud of that speed. That's obviously a massive investment in the infrastructure to make that possible. But are there any other features in particular that stand out? And I won't lead the witness, but in terms of your day-to-day use that you find yourself, reaching for in the product?
Yeah, I've said it before in this convo, alerting. How
Mhm.
many times have you been reactive to a problem potentially that is as a result of stumbling across data points that lead you to believe, oh gosh, did something go wrong? And how many times have you wished, wow, that would have been great if I had been notified of this? So alerting and the feature to set those alerts up was one of the first things that we enabled with Rill when we got all of our data integrated. We knew exactly what we needed to be proactively alerted on that historically we were being very reactive with. And that was delivered straight to our email, straight to our Slack. We live in Slack, right? So many people do. And that allowed us to solve issues in such a quicker time period and a turnaround time. And a lot of times, alongside a customer in ways that we weren't able to before. So the alerting feature has been hugely helpful. And also just all the recent things that Rill has been shipping. I think that's one of my favorite Slacks that I get every couple of weeks is a new feature update from Rill. But your Canvas dashboards, pretty graphs are absolutely applicable in so many instances. And so being able to stand up what we call our command center, where we have all of those main KPIs and able to visualize it in a way that we need to for a given metric or breakdown in the more typical pretty graph structure that you're used to in other BI tools has also been incredibly helpful and additive to the explore and pivot features that were already readily available.
Well, we're glad you're using that because we certainly know that Disco was one of those customers. They often say the best ideas for your product, and I'm sure Disco is no exception. The best ideas for features come from your users, and so we want to give credit where credit is due. It was knowing that you had this need for a more traditional dashboard like a Looker or Tableau that really drove the build out of Canvas, which we won't folks who are interested, you can look at realldata.com and find out all about Canvas. I want to end on a topic that everybody these days is talking about, which is, of course, AI.
Yeah.
And uh, we know that the world is changing under our feet. And of course, AI, of all of the places where AI is having a significant impact, it is in the space of data and analytics. And I would love to hear. I have two questions with regards to AI that I think I would love to hear your thoughts on. First is how is AI actually changing Disco's business? People aren't necessarily using Google to do search anymore, right? They're
Yeah.
asking ChatGPT or Perplexity when they're thinking about making a purchase, right? It's kind of a different journey for users in the world of e-com. And then secondly, when you think about what you would want, this is maybe a chance to tell us what we should be building, but when you think about what you want as a data-driven leader at Disco, and when you're in the elevator with your CEO and you're talking about the business, what would you want from an AI-powered analytics tool? So those are the two questions: AI, how it's changing your business, and really maybe the business of online shopping, and then what you would want from an AI-powered analytics tool.
Yeah, I mean, I won't give away our roadmap, but we're definitely always looking for ways to integrate into our product itself AI and really leaning into that. But I think more applicable is the day-to-day for individuals with AI. We're a startup, we're a lean team. Everyone wears multiple hats. How can you find those little pockets of ways to make your day more efficient, whether that's deck creation
Mhm.
or a follow-up email that you're consistently sending, whatever kind of like routine tasks that you're having to do that may have been very manual in the past, you're now able to default and lean on AI, which are readily available in a lot of the tools that customers or individuals are using. A CRM comes to mind, a lot of capabilities there that are being presented to just make your day-to-day easier, which is always great. Um, I think the data component with AI is so interesting, and AI is obviously broad and it's almost overwhelming. You know that you can do an endless amount of things with it. Where do you start? And for me in particular, that has been an overwhelming task of, gosh, where do I even start with utilizing this with our data? And I think what is really exciting me is that prompt of, hey, you've actually pulled this report 4 different times in the last week in these ways. Understanding that, do you want to pull that again? Prompting you with the questions that might take you a little bit more time to come to, like I was saying with the pivot feature, kind of giving you that nudge, or suggesting different ways to look at different data, reading the data, understanding it. Hey, typically we see when advertising companies are looking at impressions by customers, they want to see it like this. That is what I really see as the next step in being super helpful, again, to the piece of not only the people that are in the data day in, day out, but those who aren't as close to it, and making it just even more accessible for
Mhm.
them to be diving into and utilizing, is really where I'm excited to jump in more.
I think those are some great insights. I'll add, obviously, we're working hard on we're working hard on integrating AI, more than ever in Rill. But to your point of augmenting, right? I don't think we're replacing um, human analysts. I think we're looking how can we make their jobs easier. And I think in particular, folks who may not have the same depth of domain knowledge, you're a power user of a tool like Rill or another analytics tool, but someone who's maybe starting out at Disco may not have the same knowledge of what to look for. And so kind of, there's no accident that Microsoft calls their AI tool Copilot, right? But someone to sort of be a kind of the Sherpa, I guess, on the guide of making sense of data and suggesting next steps for analysis. I think it's very exciting. I think we're all just trying to figure out what the shape of that user experience is, right? Because there's so many. Should it be a Slack agent? Should it be something that
Right.
sits, inside of Rill, kind of like a better version of Clippy, the paperclip
Right.
from
Yeah.
uh, so, should it be something built into as an app as part of
Right.
OpenAI that uses Rill's, MCP server? So, I think it's exciting times. Obviously, it's fun to be at the forefront of all of this, and all building tools that are taking advantage of the innovations that folks, very smart folks out in the world are building. Um,
Exactly.
Kat, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you here as our data-driven leader from Disco. We look forward to seeing more success from Disco and from you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mike. It was a pleasure.